I think that workers are people who have to, we're the people who have to sell our labor to live. Either benefits or wages. We've got to have benefits or we've got to have wages or we can't live. And when we get to work, we have to do what we're told. Those things. And I think that's most people.
Can I try to get two questions in? You, and then this.
Thank you very much. Well, it was a fascinating, no doubt about it, talk. And it was quite moving, I think. And I hope you spread the word to everyone who just doesn't bother to think, who's very capitalist-minded, who just wants to buy a car and what have you. Anyway, what I want to say, you mentioned about something could save the whales. The whales.
Yes.
And that's something which I'm concerned about, because it's rather worrying that they're on the brink of extinction, the same as polar bears were on the brink of extinction, the same as some fishes of jackal in the Antarctica. Anyway.
Do you want to come back on this one then?
No.
There's two people, Viv and yeah.
There's a growing movement of people that are not relying on governments and politicians to do stuff for us, but this is the transition town movement, and it's all about communities coming together, people finding their own solutions locally to deal with climate change, to deal with rising food and oil prices, and what we're all going to do when we reach burn and all these kinds of things. A great example of that happened like in Cuba when the oil was cut off overnight, and there's a really good film about that called The Power of Community. People came together, they had to deal with it, growing fruit and veg wherever they could, doing it at a local level. So I wonder what role you felt that the transition town movement has to play in all of this, especially as there's a new group starting in Willesden tomorrow as well.
The last question.
I was going to mention Cuba as well, actually, but from did you watch the Hot Cities series? We were actually running a series of UN model conferences for young people in the UK with a charity I'm involved with, an organisation I'm involved with. And as part of that, we were looking at the different approaches, and Cuba is fascinating. And I was reflecting on what you were saying about poverty, but I don't think it's poverty that's the cause of our inability to act or react. It's about how we are organised or view our capacity to organise. When you look at Cuba, it's a sort of socialism that they have. In the last wave of hurricanes, not a single death happened at the same time as New Orleans. And that was because of the way they'd set it up. In a household of a set of 10 households, the strongest, highest wall was where people gathered. They were organised so that they were self-protected. The communities had already, the city gardening had set up so that when the farming breaks down, they're still able to feed themselves. It ends up organisation, and it's striking the contrast with New Orleans, where it seemed to be about individualism as opposed to collectivism that caused the deaths. It seemed to me in response. But that wasn't my question.
We've just got 5 minutes.
I know, but I've been waiting for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It was Cuba. It was the discussion about the public sector was my main question, because another thing we've been doing is a series of Your Green Futures for young people, for students to do green careers. How can we tell them to just look at the public sector when public sector is putting in swathes jobs? We have to look to broader society. You can't just say 1 million jobs going to be created in the public sector. They're just not. We had the speaker who the keynote speaker was from Marks and Spencer. He talked about Sainsbury. Marks and Spencer has got a top to bottom sustainability. I'm not here to advocate that, but I just feel like it's. I'm with the lady over here that as soon as you ghettoise things, you're cutting out swathes of societies.
Very good initiative.
Okay, John, can you come on these points now?
Okay, the whales, very simply. I know there's a danger of extinction, but in the mid-late 70s, I thought that quite a lot of species of whales were going to go. The model of organising that Greenpeace used to defend the whales, it worked. All of those species have so far been preserved. It's a victory, and we should see it as such. It's a victory. No central part of the world capitalist system was dependent on hunting whales. Do you know what I mean? There were bits and companies and so on, but they could give way on it, and it also was a brilliant campaign. Transition towns. I think there's two things here. I think one is that the role of transition towns is wherever, for instance, where we've been doing this Million Climate Jobs campaign, wherever we've asked to do a meeting jointly with the transition towns people, we do a meeting jointly with them. And they're a very large movement, and their people turn up, and people appear to be in agreement. Do you know what I mean? And we discuss things back and forth. I think on that level, it's very straightforward. But I do think there is a problem. It's because I think people in transition towns are doing it. Most of them aren't doing it on a local community level because that is their political absolute commitment that it must be done that way. Most of them are doing it that way because they think that's where it can be done. If the governments aren't doing it, let's do it there. And I do think there is something we have to crack, which is that one way or another, the key things have to be done by governments.
Yeah.
The level of investment is such. Renewable energy costs more than coal. It really does. The market simply cannot deliver it. You either deliver it with a system of government subsidies to private businesses, of which there are many different forms. You either deliver it with that, or you deliver it by the government delivering it itself. But the problems of renewable energy cannot be solved by stuff on your roof or by a home for reasons of mathematics to do with the fact that the speed of the amount of energy, I won't go into it, it's in the book. So we do need massive government investment in one form or another, and everybody knows this. And so I think, but in my mind what it is massive mobilizing an organization and people coming together at the base together to build a movement that will press the government to do something. As to whether it should be public sector or private sector, I mean, when you're telling kids who are looking for a job, you tell them to look for a job wherever they can get a job. And I'm not going to criticize whatever job you get. But in terms of whether these new jobs should be public sector or private sector, we had a lot of disagreement in the climate jobs campaign about which one it was. And we only came down on a decision in the second edition, and we did it because we couldn't think of another way to guarantee jobs to people who are going to lose them. But the larger thing, how can we make the government do this in a situation where they're cutting spending? That's a problem whether they're subsidizing private industry or whether they're doing it as public sector jobs. And the answer to that is this. The cutting of public sector spending in a recession has been tried before many times, and it's the road to hell. It's the road to hell in terms of capitalists. It's what produced the Great Depression in the 30s, was doing that. It's what the IMF did, what the IMF is trying to do to Europe now is what they did to Africa in the 1980s. Africa's never recovered. It's what they did to Latin America in the 1990s, and it's called the Lost Decade. It's what they've done to Greece and Ireland, and we see what that does. And so we have to have an expansion in public spending. If we don't, our mothers and fathers in old age, and us in old age, and our grandchildren are in very serious trouble. Do you know what I mean? Everybody's got a favorite thing. Mine is that 40% of the posts for diabetes specialist nurses are now unfilled. But there are an enormous range of things that we will lose with the cuts in public expenditure. But the corporations and the government, it's a road to hell because they cut public expenditure, so the economy goes into recession, so they get less back than they had. And what we have to argue for, we have to argue for now very loudly is an increase in government expenditure. It's the only, when I gave the example of the Second World War, when they did that massive rearmament across the world, it pulled the whole world out of the Great Depression. Killed a lot of people, but pulled the whole world out of the Great Depression. If government, it was Keynes' insight, if government spend more money when they're in a recession, that gets the economy starting again. I think we have to argue for that. I think at the moment it's a hard argument to win, but I think we're going to have a big movement in this country if the unions and demonstrations and Uncut and everything else against the cuts. And if we start to win some victories then, and at the same time, the government comes up against the kind of economic wall and collapse I think they're going to come up against, then the argument for doing it differently I think is going to be very strong. But so I think at the moment it's part of arguing for something that looks unrealistic, but is the only realistic way to solve it. What you say to a kid who's looking for a job right now, do you know what I mean? You say, we need this big campaign, but also just, here's it, try this or try that.
Right, I think we need...
Yeah.
We are going to go to the Rising Sun right now, so anybody who hasn't got any questions that they want to ask Joel, bring them over. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, very quickly, it's been a great meeting and there are plenty more in the pipeline. So anybody here who's not already on our email list, please leave your details on board. Secondly, there are copies of the 1 Million Climate Job report that Jonathan was the main author for, supported by 4 national trade unions. They're at the back there and they're for sale. You can get the first edition for next to nothing. I also want to mention, Jonathan, that although it's a long way off, another reason for being on the mailing list is that the trade union group of Campaign Against Climate Change is in the process of organising a trade union conference in October, probably, on the question of jobs, food and climate change. And we want to get speakers from different parts of the world, particularly from South Africa,